Hi, and welcome to the School Health Educators Podcast, where we discuss health education and how to best teach health ed in the K through 12 setting. Hi, welcome to the School Health Educators Podcast. I'm your host, Lori Reichel, and today is part two of talking with the wonderful Kevin Mason. How we got connected was I saw he was posting some stuff on the Facebook, the Health Central. Is that what it's called, Kevin? The Health Teacher
Health Teacher
Central?
Center. Yep,
Something
yep.
like that.
Mhm.
And I noted that here's a person that is talking about skill based health education. So I connected with him and kind of lured him into being a guest on a podcast episode. I actually convinced him to do two, though. What we're going to do in this episode is talk about one of the units he did share on Facebook. The first episode, Kevin talked about his background a little bit, as well as how he learned about skill based health education, advice for others, making his kids think, challenging them. In this episode, we're going to go and explore his analyzing influences units, and that is the national standard of number two, numero dos. So, Kevin, would you say hi to our audience and remind us a little bit about your background?
Hey everybody. Yeah. So again, Kevin Mason. I'm originally from Rhode Island. Grown up, born and raised there, and then I went to college in at University of Indianapolis. I did 4 years bachelor's, got my master's health and PE there as well. And then immediately moved out to Denver right after that, and that's where I've been for about 6 years. I was a K-8 basically PE and health teacher. My first 3 years out here, COVID hit, everything kind of got all crazy. And I kind of bounced around to an online school and all this stuff. But I'm now settled in my second year at a 6-8 middle school teaching health. So happy to be here.
And you created this unit based on analyzing influences for what grade level?
So this specific one is for seventh and eighth grade. I use it for both of those grade levels. I would say after doing this was literally the first time I've ever done it. And I would say it's much more suited for eighth grade. But seventh grade with a lot of conferring and a lot of support and a lot of modeling, they're totally fine doing it as well.
It's interesting. You can tell that difference between seventh and eighth grade thinking, like where
Mhm.
they're at.
Yep. Yep. Yep, and that conferring, which we'll get into, is sort of where you're able to see those differences and those levels.
Well, what was or what is the rationale for your unit? I ask my future teachers to first think about, consider why are they doing what they're doing? Not just jump into the lessons, but to be like, well, this is backwards design, understanding by design. Why are we going to do this unit? And part of that is the rationale. So, what is your rationale?
Yeah, so that UBD is pretty much where I started, and I didn't used to start there. Again, just another learning experience, and I have a fantastic instructional coach. Him and I, have really been building these units together. But
Wait, before you
yeah.
continue, so you have somebody in your district that knows UBD. They understand that backwards design.
Oh, at my school, yeah. Yep. His name is Taylor Schmidt. None of this stuff would happen without him. He's awesome. One of the other football coaches I work with every single day. Really, really excellent educator.
Oh, I love it. Thank you so much again. If you're a current or former student of mine, you see, I don't make this stuff up. It's out there. This is a best practice in education. That's
hmm
awesome. Awesome sauce. Okay,
Yeah.
so what's the rationale?
Yeah, so I chose to start with just an essential question. I looked at my analyzing influences unit from last year, and most of the stuff I had pushing out was just getting kids like to connect analyzing influences to a very specific content. Again, I used to do this for alcohol and other drugs units. I do vaping with it as well, and really, I used to focus again, like I used to almost pretend to teach skills-based health ed where like, yeah, I'd introduce all the skills, but then it's really mainly teaching, excuse me, mainly teaching the content. So this semester, this year, I've really, really buckled down. And I wanted to create a unit that was strictly teaching the actual skill. So I actually put the content to the side for this unit. And it really helped me wrap my head around like fully teaching skills-based health ed. Yeah, so the rationale, I guess, just going back to it was I had to come up with an essential question, like what was the main takeaway that I wanted kids to have after this unit. Um, and when I create the essential questions, I want them not just being like a yes or no answer. You want them being like, how can I utilize the content I just learned to form an opinion about something, to talk in depth about something? So my essential question was, how do the influences in my life impact how I think, feel, and act? And that goes back to like, the state standards and everything with some little tweaks in there. It's not specifically focused on family, culture, and everything that you'll see in the standards. However, if they're able to talk about like, here's an influence, and this is how this influence impacts my thoughts, and that may be different than how it impacts my feelings and my actions and everything. So that generating that essential question was honestly like the biggest thing for me, and I just worked everything back from there.
Why did you choose analyzing influences? Why for the eighth grade? You said it would work perfectly with eighth grade. Why?
Hmm. Well, it's mostly the conversations that they're able to have. When we work in groups, partners, one-on-one, I basically the whole unit is set up in a workshop model as well. And if no one's familiar with it, again, something I'm learning and working through this year is starting with a warm-up. That warm up is connected typically to the mini lesson that day. So you start the warm up. I do like some breathing, stress relief stuff, and then we get into a mini lesson. The mini lesson is anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes, and that can be kind of chunked throughout. So like it could go warm up, mini lesson, work time, mini lesson, work time, work time, like it can just be all over the place. But the main theme of it is you start with like a classic model is just the warm up, moving into a mini lesson, 5 or 10 minutes. And then the majority of the class is work time for students where they have time to practice the skills that you just taught them. And during that work time, that's where the true teaching happens and also where the true learning happens. And then sort of like just some sort of closure or assessment at the end. That workshop model is something that all of this fits into as well, which is included in the rationale.
So, what I'm hearing you say is that eighth graders, that they are being influenced and they
Mm.
need to learn the skills to be cognizant of the fact that they might be manipulated. There's so much going on internally and externally that they have the ability to be critical thinkers, identifying influences, noting if they're positive or negative, and
Mm.
how to change their decisions because of outside or internal influences.
Yeah, absolutely. And yes, sorry to loop back to it is I meant to say like during that work time portion of the classes, when I pull kids for little 3 to 4 minute conferring meetings and stuff, like really pulling the questions and the thinking out of them, and like furthering their thinking with like, hey, you're able to connect this influence to how like your daily actions, but are you considering like how it's making you feel every day, regardless of like whether or not you think it's positive or negative for your actions. And so I think eighth grade was best suited for really thinking through that in a less concrete way, a little more abstract. But again, I did the same unit with seventh grade, and once you model that thinking to them during that mini lesson time, and you metacognitively explain what's going on in your brain in this situation, use lots of examples, then they're able to really grasp that the more abstract nature of the unit.
So you have this unit, the base is analyzing influences, and then you're
Mhm.
infusing functional health knowledge on alcohol and other drugs.
Ideally, but for this unit, I actually did not infuse any real content. I just kind of
Okay,
sprinkled in different content throughout the mini lessons throughout the unit. But the main thing, and that was again something I'm working on, is really just focusing on the actual skill itself and teaching just the skill.
very good.
And I'll go into it more, but my idea behind that is like my goal behind all of this is to constantly thread that through like all the different skills throughout the
Hmm.
entire semester. So we teach the skill now, and then later on, when I'm teaching more of the content, then we loop back in, okay, now what are
Okay,
the influences in this situation and so on.
very good.
Yep.
Because I know it is a skill set to figure out how to do that. I would introduce a communication unit at the high school level in
Mhm.
which there is a variety of functional health knowledge being put in, whether it be about alcohol, whether it be about something with STD prevention or
Yeah.
intervention. So that was
Yep.
infused in with at the unit. So it wasn't just one content area, it was a bunch. So that's good for you for exploring all of that.
Yeah. Yep. And that goes with embracing the challenges at the beginning of this stuff, like I mentioned before.
What acronym do you use for your unit?
Yeah, so I went off of this was something I played around with when I was creating the unit. I didn't really it's not so much that I didn't like the examine step of it. So we use the identify influences, analyze those influences, and then create an action plan. And the reason I did that is I felt like I was sort of tying in the examine step in that analyze step because it's so massive.
Hmm.
So yeah, I just kind of broke it down into those three: identify, analyze, and create, and just go from there.
Okay. And if you're
Mhm.
wondering, what are you talking about, like these acronyms and this I and the A,
Yeah.
uh, Kevin is referring to a book that we mentioned when we were chatting before we started recording, and that's the lesson planning book with Sarah Bennis and Holly Alperin. They actually utilize an acronym in there, and I teased Kevin that I'm not the biggest person to always use an acronym. That I don't want to be the acronym person. I challenge my students to, if they want to use an acronym, to create their own. They have every right to. And my graduate students right now in a current course, they're using their own acronym, which is really neat. So I appreciate that you're processing like what would be best for your students, what parts of that or what
Mhm.
words or letters, I should say, would work best.
Definitely. Yep.
Would you mind just going over the overview of your unit? Like from like, do you introduce the skill first and then the cues? Are you following that? Because that's also from the Bennis and Alperin book.
Yeah. I think something I do differently than what again, like a very new teacher. So I think just what I do differently than what I've seen shared is I try to focus like skill cue by skill cue. So like focus
Okay.
on just one at each time, focus on that for a day or two, maybe move on to the next one. And it really just all depends on where students are at, how well they're grasping it. It might take one day less for one class and one day more for another. Um, and like that's what sort of the workshop model and everything is based on, is like being able to reteach things and going back to them. But yeah, I introduce it. We play an Uno card game where I cannot for the life of me remember who shared it. It might have been Gina Lang, I think,
Okay.
where she basically had a an Uno card game, and it's like, hey, if you play this card, you answer this question. So it's just a very fun way to introduce the unit. Most of the questions are like, what is a positive influence in your life? What are internal influences? And they just have conversations at their tables hook them into the unit. From there, this is my second unit I do. So we do the Chris Nikich story for goal setting. And so that's our first unit. And then in our second unit, I loop back to that Chris Nikich story, and I have like a little silhouette piece of paper that I changed it a lot, but the idea comes from Jessica Matheson. She made this like influences silhouette. where it's like they write in their internal influences inside the head, external outside. So I sort of took that concept and connected it to the Chris Nikic story. So if anyone hasn't watched that, it's an incredible story of a man who had Down syndrome who ran an Ironman, and like students are hooked on it the whole video.
Hmm.
So again, I've kind of talked about like threading things through and constantly like going back to things so that it just kind of, I feel like, increases retention for them. So I basically have that sheet and I say in this Chris Nikic story, what were some internal influences he had and what were some external ones. And that's it. And we, throughout the unit, constantly go back to that sheet and I bring it back out and I say, okay, now you listed these. Now, which ones were positive and negative? And now which ones take one of these and create an action plan for it? So I use that sort of as like a warm-up activity and just to get them introduced to the topic, to the skill. Um, yeah, so that's day two. That's sort of how we introduce it. And then from there, I start really diving into the skill cues. We do this influences and control activity, which is um, again, all of this requires modeling at the beginning. So you have to model on the front board. And again, it's really short, and kids really like, the theory is kids just want to do stuff. They don't want to just sit there and listen. They want to actually practice and they want to do things. They want to try things. So, quick model. So what I did is I used my family. So I put family in the center and I just drew a web around it. And I said, this is how my family influences me this way. And I just like kept creating different things, positive, negative, all that stuff. And then like the I do, you do, we do type things. So they did one with social media in groups. So I put social media in the center. Okay, now as a group, you guys need to consider like, how does social media try to control you? Because that's at the end of the day, influences try to control you. And the whole idea with the skill is like giving students the ability to get that control back over the influence in their lives. So we do that. I give them the work time is just like, how does this influence try to control you, and just getting them to reflect on that. And then we move into that chalk talk activity that got a lot of traffic on Facebook post. Basic idea behind it is I took white butcher paper, laminated it, hung up posters all around the room. I cannot right now remember how much it was, but I gave each student a dry erase marker. And the question I posed at the beginning of the activity was, share questions you need to ask yourself to figure out if an influence is trying to control you. And this is where you go around to each poster and you're checking in with groups, really pushing thinking in a group setting. And Chalk Talk protocol is basically like you're talking with your marker. So there's no talking during it. Most classes do okay with that. Some classes you gotta, model and give those reminders. But for the most part, they just write all those questions on the paper. I give them a scenario and I say, now use these questions and test them out in this scenario. And the goal of the activity is just to generate questions that analyze influences, because my idea was there's no, like, I could give them the questions, but it's not going to be as meaningful. So we generated them. They
Excellent.
put a star next to like their favorite ones. And then each group took one person and they went up and wrote it on the board. And those were the questions we used to analyze influences throughout the
Wonderful.
unit. Yeah.
How do you perceive your students like this unit? Like you're asking them to think. So how does it go? Are they embracing it? They liking it?
Yeah, the first couple days are a struggle. I am not gonna, mince words or anything. It is really tough at the beginning. However, if you constantly, I use Plickers in my classroom as a formative assessment tool. So every single day, when they walk in, they go back to the Plickers board. I have them on like the little magnets, but I sort of changed it to fit to my classroom. So they basically turn their Plicker and the question will be like, how are you feeling about the identifying step? And so that self-reporting grades with like John Hattie is like a very strong indicator and everything and effect size. So I try to like, that's my way of doing that. So kids are usually pretty honest on those. And it's easy to be like, okay, these students really are struggling. They're telling me they're struggling. The Plickers are saying they're struggling. Um, and so it's easier to check in with them individually instead of again as a full class. I try to minimize the full class stuff as much as I can. But yeah, so they struggle at the beginning, but it really, really does get better as the unit goes on.
And it seems like you have some access to technology in your district.
Yes, yep,
That's
yep.
excellent.
Everyone has a Chromebook. Well, for the most part, so they might have 10 keys missing, but they all have a Chromebook.
Okay. But also that tool that you just said, you have access to that.
Yeah, so yeah, Plickers is an online tool. It's just a little QR code and they orient the Plicker to give their answer four
Okay.
slides. And I have again, I'm happy to share the template for it. I think I have it up on Teachers Pay Teachers. But yeah, it's very, very helpful.
So they use their phones for it.
No, so they go back, and they're all laminated on a backboard. And so, say I'm number 10, I go back to the backboard, I find number 10, I move it over, and I turn it, giving my answer. So, like A, B, C, or
Okay.
D. I also have it as like teach it, got it, getting it, and not yet.
Okay.
So yeah, so they give that answer, and then I
Good
go
for you.
back with my iPad, I open up the Plickers app, and it just scans all the QR codes, gives me all the student answers immediately, and I just kind of move from there.
Very good.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Very, very good. I would like to ask, and
Mhm.
you have the right to pass here, Kevin. My question that I like to ask though is how do you assess this unit overall? What's your summative assessment?
Yeah, so summative is just a two-part assessment. Again, I have lots of formatives throughout. Those conferring meetings I have with students. I have a letter to a positive influence that they write. So we identify the characteristics of a positive influence, and then they write one, just says like it's kind of like eases off things a little bit for them. But the summative assessment is two parts. First part is a mind map that I created. So it is, um, it's very hard to explain without seeing it. Um, but basically, if you've seen like like hexagonal thinking,
Hmm.
have you seen that before? So it's not that,
Oh,
but
yeah.
have say a hexagon with an influence in it, and students, it's a PowerPoint slide, and students have to move that hexagon with the influence inside of it based on like to either the positive or negative side, also based on going back to the essential question, how it impacts their thoughts, feelings, or actions. So that's the first part. The goal of that is just to organize their thoughts. When I'm assessing it, I need to be able to see if they're able to meet the essential question that we had. So if they organize their thoughts, like here's the influence, here's how it impacts my thoughts in a positive or negative way, and they do the same thing with all the different ones. And then after that mind map, all I do is just to assess the skill is I have a separate sheet, part two, where I just call it the final assessment. And they pick one positive influence, one negative influence, and they go through all the steps for it. So, how does it affect you? What were the analyzing questions that you asked yourself to figure out whether or not it was positive or negative? And they really have to explain their full answers. And then as long as you can see their thinking in their response, and I also grade like which questions they ask themselves to analyze the influence, because some are much better than others given the situation. And then they have to create an action plan to handle the negative one. So
Nice. Thank you for sharing that.
yeah, absolutely.
Anything else you want to add before we end this episode?
Um, no, not really. There's a lot to this unit. It took forever to build, and I just use so much stuff from online as ideas and everything, and just very grateful to everyone who does share, and I'm just trying to do my part in sharing back to the community. And hopefully this podcast helps with that as well. And I would just encourage people to just keep trying new things. And that's sort of this is like the art of teaching, not the science. And
Nice.
yeah, just keep trying those new things and being creative, and students appreciate the novelty for sure.
And how can somebody get in touch with you if they wanted to?
Yes, so my again, I'm on Health Teacher Central on Facebook, Kevin Patrick. My Twitter is Mr. Mason Health, no punctuation or anything in there, just MR Mason Health. And then I can give you my email and everything, and we can throw all that in the notes. So
Well, I thank you again so much for your time. Thank you for both episodes. I mean, meeting you, it's your second year in this educator in this position, and
Mhm.
you are sharing so much of your wisdom already. I mean, I'm hearing instructional strategies that they're student engaging and student centered, which is wonderful. Keep up the positive work and give a high five to the person that you're working with the UBD, the backwards design, hearing an essential question. I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
So keep on doing that for your students. I'm so lucky to know that there are people like you working with the young people. We need you. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Thank you to you as well. This is a great resource.
Well, to our listeners, we thank you so much for listening in. And please continue to follow this podcast on your favorite podcast platform and check out the schoolhealtheducators.org website. If you have some resources that need to be added onto there, please let me know. You can send an email to schoolhealtheducators@gmail.com. And remember that you make a difference. You matter. So thanks for doing what you're doing and stay well, folks. Have a great day.
Bye.